Muy buenas tardes a todas. Parece un maratón, ¿no? Queremos jugar, pues sigamos jugando con las palabras, con las imágenes, con las voces. Y ahora simplemente a presentaros a nuestros tres invitados de esta mesa que, como os decíamos, buscará pues que juguemos en toda su multiplicidad. Por un lado arrancará Lucía Sesma, filóloga, lingüista y autora, que se centra en ese poder transformador del lenguaje como herramienta para comprender, para narrar y resignificar.
Sorry for the technical glitch. It seems we are having some problems in the English booth. Lucía tackles language not only as a means of communication, but as a way of resisting and reaffirming human dignity against absurdity and injustice. Then she will be followed by Moritz Neumüller, curator, a specialist in photography and new media. And I've assigned him this year to prepare a program, an agenda of photographic screenings. Those screenings would be a great corollary for this day. So I would like to officially thank him for all the efforts over the last years to compile 15 photographic projects around the idea of play. So Maurice, with his commitment with cultural accessibility and critical thinking, task and role played focused on art as an inclusive and conscious space. So Yinka Esi Graves, she's a dancer, choreographer, whose work is focused mainly on a lucid criticism to the structures of cultural invisibility. Through her body, through her performance and creations, she challenges dominant narratives by celebrating the beauty of flamenco dance, and she also uses as a tool to unlock and confront historical and contemporary injustices. So I leave you with these three outstanding speakers.
Bienvenidos, os doy la enhorabuena por estar
Welcome.
en este
I congratulate you all for being here at the time of siesta, so I very much hope you find it worthwhile. I would like to first express my gratitude to Sandra for inviting me. I used to work with them, to collaborate with them, and now I'm here as a speaker. In the last days, it's been an intensive time since we started just yesterday with Leila's words. Several important terms have been positive, such as resistance, resilience, and absurdity. I would like to encourage you all, to congratulate you all as attendants, because yesterday we played a wonderful role by attending Lila's presentation. You played. You resisted when there was a ship, a luxurious ship, a yacht behind Leila, passing behind Leila, while she made a beautiful and exquisite speech. And we stayed there and reaffirmed ourselves by listening to her attentively, and thus emerged an equally absurd and equally act and moment. So we are here to listen to the other. That's why we are gathered here today. I would like to start with this reflection, with these words. Kapuscinski said in his book, in this encounter with the other human beings throughout history, since they left, the first tribes left Africa, when they met the others, the different ones, there were three alternatives in that encounter to approach it: war, building up walls, or isolation, and dialogue. So here we are with dialogue, which is the best choice, the best option: fighting, fleeing, or speaking. And to me, language is essential. The power conveyed by language, by the use of word. It builds up our identity, both collective and individual. So we'll see that although Kapuscinski provided these three options, and we will definitely choose the third one, dialogue, language is not, well, sometimes can lead us to confrontation or isolation. Well, through words. Rousseau, curiously enough, Rousseau defended passions as the real and true origin of languages. And I quote, "It is neither hunger nor thirst, but love, hatred, grief, rage that plucked out the first voices. The fruits do not escape from our hands. One can eat without speaking, one pursues in silence the prey one wants to devour." End of quote. So this philosopher affirmed these words nearly 300 years ago. So science is confirming today what he said in our century. Neanderthals already had an articulate language. This has been proven by biology, both the phonic autonomy, anatomy, and also our cognitive capacity, the space, thanks to their skulls, they were able to speak already 135,000 years ago. When 1,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, migrations from Africa began, languages evolved because emotional impulses emerged. Our most distant ancestors already had art rituals that reflected a deep spirituality, such as the need to bury their dead and to make a sense of time beyond survival. Life in community outside the cave led us over time to generate a code that, in addition to transmitting information, made us human. Although the word human being has sometimes become a phrase that is closer to an oxymoron than an actual description, we continue with this tireless quest for being worthy of that name. Since we are born, we build up an identity through language. We learn it as children through game and transform it later when games become more and more complex, sometimes so much so that we have to use secret codes to survive. The first articulated sounds we utter refer both to the need for nourishment and to the need to communicate, to show emotions. The word mummy, mum, is usually one of the first words uttered by babies together with papa or dad. This bilabial position of the M, the most natural one, is linked to the sound of the A vowel, the maximum mouth opening. So you have to uncurl your lips, take air, and then pass it along the vocal cords until you pronounce the astonishing ma, this syllable. So from an early age, we double it as to incest, to build mama or mum. It shares something fascinating because it banishes all those linguistic theories that tell us that language is arbitrary, that is, there is no relationship between the form, the word, and the referent. So with certain variations, mom and dad are similar ways of saying the same thing in different language. Sumerian, Yoruba, Spanish, Dutch, English, Basque, Swahili, endless list of languages. Learning to speak is learning to play. Alphabets are just a list of letters that we have to fictionalize to make sense of them. The first steps to handling a language are narrative and lie going hand in hand with this. We need the strangeness. We need to wander in order to grow. C is a round donut like an O that someone bit, and the E is an F that put on clown shoes. Just as you have just visualized these letters transformed into others through a children's story or play, any word we name here and now will have this ability to create a reality in our minds, or at least the possibility of a reality. This is how thought and word interrelate. In Hitchcock's Torn Curtain, there is a scene in that film with two astrophysicists that are pursued by the Stasi, and they enter a ballet performance. They are cornered by the entire audience, but the character played by Paul Newman says a single word that allows him to fly, to escape. He says aloud, "Fire!" And although there is no real fire, the audience in that performance believes that statement, and in their minds, in all their minds, there is fire. So this causes chaos, a chaos that allows them to blend into the crowd and escape. Just a single word, the utterance of a single word. I could have used an example from Trump, President Trump, on all the consequences of any of his statements. This is a gift of myself to you. I'd rather use Paul Newman's words than Trump's ones. We tend to forget that words are action. There are rituals where this is most evident. A halt at a firing squad, like the one that saved Dostoevsky from certain death, or a judge's saying, "I pronounce you man and wife." Even until 2019, in India, pronouncing 3 times talaq, the word for divorce, gave men the legal right to divorce, unilaterally, of course. So that triple talaq is an extreme and quite despicable example of how we can perform things with words. But there are many more cases. Throughout history, there have been moments when just a few words precipitated crucial events. That mokutsatsu, meaning no comment, pronounced by Japanese Prime Minister Kantaro Sukuskis to the Allied peace proposal in July 1945, whose ambiguity in diplomatic language proved to be a good excuse or pretext for the Americans who dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima within days after that. Ambiguity also played a dirty trick on King Croesus of Lydia in the 6th century before Christ, when after inquiring to the Delphic oracle, he asked whether he would be winning the war against Cyrus, the king of Persia. The Sibyl replied, "A great empire will fall." How could Croesus think that this empire would be his? We never think that it will be us that fall. Now, at the end of the 20th century, we are on the night of the 9th of November 1989 in a press room in Berlin, where there was no room for one more international correspondent. Near at the end of this tense and tedious press conference, as they say, the member of the government committee called Günther Schabowski from the GDR, he produced a piece of paper announcing that East Germans would not need any passport or visa to travel to any country. In bewilderment, a journalist from the Italian news agency ANSA, Riccardo Ehrmann, he asked him, "Ab sofort?" That means immediately. Schabowski hesitated, puzzled, in puzzlement, unable to find any piece of paper, any document to confirm a possible answer. So he replied what Ehrmann had served him on a plate, "Ab sofort," he pronounced. So those statements were televised or broadcasted live. So not only did journalists rush out to announce it in their newsrooms, but thousands of Germans heard that at the same time, and they all rushed to the border crossing points at that night. The Berlin Wall fell. And I imagine you remember former U.S. Secretary of State, Colin Powell, when on February the 5th, 2003, he alerted the UN Security Council that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction. Those words led the United States, Great Britain, and Spain to go to war. Words, as Edwy Plenel said, they didn't correspond to reality. They didn't match reality, as even Powell himself admitting it later on. But they had already shouted fire, as Paul Newman did, and large part of the international community believed there was fire out there without seeing the smoke. And we also are aware of the consequences, disastrous consequences. These games are much less tender and cozy than the little story I told you about the origin of the sea. On the road to adulthood in adolescence, we construct another identity through language. Those who have young people around us will know the centrifugal effect that occurs when they speak. That means the terms are the language they use to relate to their tribe, to the members of their tribe. They create vital complicity among their peers and expel the rest, knowing what estar en tu prime, estar living, or stalkear, stalking somebody in the social media, or ser la cabra, being the greatest of all. If you are old enough and still know this, know what these statements mean, has a lot of merit. Youthful friendships make up one of the first tribes we choose in life. Later on, we follow this adolescent impulse, although we give it a more sophisticated air. We still want to be accepted, loved by others. That is why we create professional jargons and, well, similar ways of speaking that unites us and expels the other. We even play with the way we ask ourselves, or we introduce ourselves, our own proper name, how we are called. By using the example of writers and their pseudonym, we see that we can be someone, although sometimes it's convenient or most suitable to be someone else, to pretend to be someone else. This example, you can see this picture of the Navajo Indians. This played a decisive role in the Second World War when they were recruited to build a squad, and those are historical moments we found out about many years later. The Navajo language has not written language. They created a battalion and they took advantage of this to create the code to fight the Japanese, because they were really good at coding. You can see it here. Well, I was speaking about writers, one of my favorite ones. He was very much loved by all of us in these Trobades. Robert Galbraith published the novel The Cuckoo's Call in 2017. So with some irony, his publishing house printed 1,500 copies in April. But when somebody revealed that July that J.K. Rowling was the best-selling author of the Harry Potter saga was behind the name, a famous sales platform declared that sales soared by 500,000%. So here, the importance of our identity and how we present ourselves to the rest of the world. Behind the pseudonym Carmen Mola, I'm sure you know about this literary phenomenon, there are three male writers. Carmen Mola is three male writers, and their identities were only revealed in 2021 when they won the €1 million worth Planeta Prize. How different is this case from that of Yasmina Khadra, who took refuge in her wife's two maiden names at her suggestion. Mohamed Mouleshoul, an ex-military man born in Algeria in 1955, had to be under the cover of that pseudonym to avoid censorship and to protect his own life, according to his own account.
Esther López Barceló
rescues in her book The Art of El Arte de Invocar la Memoria. I very much recommend it. She reminds us of the story of Manuela del Arco. She was a militant of the Communist Party of Spain and an activist during the Spanish Civil War. She was imprisoned during the Franco dictatorship for 19 years. In the prisons of Las Ventas in Madrid and Segovia, she earned money by suing, like her fellow prisoners. In a notebook, the one you are seeing on the image, it was called Primavera, Spring. They wrote down these instructions for sewing different embroideries. So these are combinations of letters, a code that is used by sewers. However, they used that combination of letters and numbers to create the so-called sewing notebook, which was a tool to clandestinely communicate with the outside. They needed a different code, as we saw this morning. Speakers presented different codes. Sometimes we just cannot speak openly. We cannot use the language as it is, and we need to create our own language with our own codes just to survive as these female prisoners. When Manolita's son, Miguel Ángel Martínez, turned this story into fiction, he tells us that he asked his mother to decode those signs, but she always refused and told him that if he ever needed to do so, he would make his own codes. He could find his own way forward. So we've seen how since the remote origins of language, vital social and cultural circumstances have marked our being. Word and identity have always been closely intertwined, so linked that we have almost forgotten that language has the power to betray, to condemn, or to redeem, but also to heal and, of course, to amaze. Thank you.
Esta proyección ahora está en la última. Por favor, vayamos a la primera.
Let's go to the first slide, please.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Quiero recoger un poco el hilo que
I'd like to
las palabras, las imágenes, los códigos,
link these ideas of codes, words, ideas in front of the cameras here as a means or tool to document reality.
Empezar con algunas contemplaciones, algunas reflexiones
I'd like to begin by remembering Wittgenstein's Austrian philosopher's words being fundamental when we talk about games, philosophy, words, images. These language games are not the same as playing with words that can be puns or difficult expressions to be translated. My children's, for example, being bi or trilingual, when they try to translate some expressions, and translating jokes is really, really hard. This would be the joke itself, you know, explaining a funny story would be a language game, a pun in the Wittgenstein's sense, you know, going shopping, explaining a joke, whatever. the way we use language rather than theory or the function of each word. It's different from St. Augustine or the Greek philosophers. I mean, the use of language, the use of words, as you've explained, it goes hand in hand, language and the meaning of it. And something similar could be said about images. I would like to quickly share with you an anecdote. A year and a half ago, I was in China in a festival, and as a good father, of course, I had to purchase a little present for my kids. And in a toy shop, I found this toy, the top toy, a Make Fun Happen. And not to use Sandra's words by Camus, but basically not to criticize, but rather try to understand better, I'd like to say that according to my education as a child, when I played, it was a taboo to play to war games, differently to what Leila said with the little soldiers. For us, it was so negative. I mean, when I see a Lego tank or it just doesn't fit on my, it's, of course, I purchased it as I also did with this book in Chinese also. Maybe it's a pre-book, as Jorge would name it. It's a children's storybook, and it was so striking that, as you can see on the top, it says baby for early readers. It shows to the young Chinese child how to write and how to pronounce a machine gun, a grenade, a nuclear submarine, a torpedo. So it's so shocking. And of course, there are plenty of things that we don't understand when we approach the other, a different culture. But photography, art in general, is one of our tools that can help us. In the same festival where I was, this is work by a young photographer on today's China. It's a type of Disneyland inauguration ceremony, and you can see the ephemeral idea of this castle. It looks almost like cardboard boxes. They have not, it was planned this way. And also the fact that no one really is looking at those wonderful fireworks. They are just looking at their screens. This is something that is common to us, in concerts, etc. And this other project by this young student in the festival, she wanted to document a day at IKEA in Beijing, drinking the morning coffee, brushing your teeth in this IKEA universe. This is another student that I asked him to pose in front of his photographs with his interpretation of our contemporary world, living in this plateau cave with the synthetic artificial image being the light or the shadows that we interpret. And talking again about light and shadows, here you can see a very well-known image, the black hole. But it's not really an image per se, it's a construction, it's a myriad of data that have been collected and combined from different telescopes. It's rather sound than image. that here they are transformed into an image. I interviewed Peter Gallison, who is one of the persons deciding that the color of this formation should be these red, orange, and yellow hues, because one of the colleagues in the project said that the hottest part of the flame is blue, so it should be blue. And then he answered, no, nobody's going to understand, because people understand hot with red or yellow or oranges. So it was one of the images most seen during those days. And then internet reacted as a game with all these memes, as you can see, with all the different interpretations of this black hole. The image was actually questioned since the beginning. In the 70s, artists used the camera. Peter Bible, for example, here you can see these two trees, more or less the same size as the artist, but then downstairs you can clearly see that the artist is as tall as the first, but the second is much smaller. So the image showing lies or fake ideas, images can lie as words can lie. And here, the way the synthetic image and how it's evolving, and this new epoch of misinformation, of these days of lies or fake news, these synthetic images, they can be reproduced, they can go viral, they could be true or false, but it seems that it doesn't matter really whether it's true or false. Let me quickly advance. These are some experiments that I did with AI. I used Kim Jong-un, that was mentioned before, and the karaoke. And this is the result. Let me please tell you, it's pretty good. A few years ago, Iran, in a press release, they announced that they had done a test with several nuclear heads that could transport, that could be rocketed. And a day later, online, someone analyzed that this image with 4 rockets has been cloned, and maybe it was only 1 or 2, but surely not 4. So again, the internet reacted with plenty of memes and exaggerated or cartoon images. This criticism, this visual, harsh criticism. A year and a half ago, I interviewed this German author, Boris Eldagsen, who had won a photography, Sony World Photography Award, with an image, synthetic, an AI image. He was transparent about it. It was almost a performance to foster dialogue, to talk about whether something is photography or not. And during the interview, we openly spoke about what the difference is, and we showed step by step how he had built that fake image. Because it's not true that an image in an artistic image can be done in 5 seconds. Usually it's a process that takes many steps, and requires the use of different techniques. Maybe for an image is enough to have a brilliant idea, but in order to achieve a series of artworks and a series of ideas that are consistent in Liangzhou in southern China, we see the exhibition of Boris Eldakson's photographs. I was curating part of the international aspect, Chris Jordan's work, that you will see this evening in the projections later on. And you can see this famous Japanese wave of the 19th century that he translates into these microplastic, millions and millions of microplastics, having formed an island 3 times the extension of France in the Pacific Island. Again, more microplastics killing seabirds and being part of the food chain. These are, again, examples of Chris Jordan's series that you will see also in the projection later on. Another artist that plays with the image and the concept of plastic in art as a message to raise awareness is Vanze Gunzel from Germany. She does this sort of performances or performance events in museums. This is in Thessaloniki, where she collects plastics and then she throws it back to sea a few meters away, and people are, you know, pulling their hairs. It's scandalous, but this is what she wants to create. And in her recent work, she collaborates with some scientists using AI. As we've heard, AI has plenty of positive aspects. One of them, these scientists, for example, they use AI to analyze images, and they use drones to find waste in river banks and to analyze them depending on the nature of or the materials of this waste. Here you can see different regions, green and blue, meaning nature and water, of course, but all the gray areas or different colors means waste. They collect and transform and analyze these images, and he uses them to create art pieces. Sebastião Salgado is a world-known photographer. We all know his trajectory, and he has battled throughout his career, his life, to raise awareness towards the protection of nature. Recently, this exhibition was held here in Barcelona, the Amazonia, and the tactile Amazonia touch, as you can see here, this beautiful relieved reinterpretation of his photographs for blind people were amazing. Of course, if you compare these to different artistic disciplines like the use of the word or sculpture, Photography is a non-accessible medium for people with issues, sight problems, or blind people. In a project that Sandra mentioned before, we also use photography, in this case stereoscopic. As you can see, two images of the 3D postcard effect. The computer and the digital printing techniques can translate this 3D to tactile relief, these little sculptures, let's see, to help blind visitors. This embossed technique. It's very important these days to be able to play, to touch. And here we've needed to learn a brand new alphabet of how to use our fingers, the tip of our fingers when interacting with the screens. In some medieval manuscripts, you can see these little fingertips highlighting as a fluorescent crayon these days. You can see with his long finger in medieval up to 3 hands here highlighting a specific paragraph. The first mobile phone with tactile screen was in the market in 1994, 13 years before the iPhone. But it didn't have plenty of success. It had maps, email, everything a smartphone needs these days. It had almost as many things as an iPhone of 2007, but it was not very successful. And Milan Flusser, the philosopher, back then wrote that this new species has been born, and this new species has no members. It has just been reduced to a fingertip, one finger only, to type on a keyboard or touch a screen. This is a big contrast because children, when they play, they not only use one finger, they use their whole body to interact. We see this in the parks where kids play. In Spanish, we say parques infantiles, but in English, it's playground, right? So it's the space, the ground where they play. It's not only a park for children, as in Spanish, but an actual space. And let me use my last minute for you to see a playground that has been called like this because it's a park for children that has been designed by architects, taking into consideration all these playful aspects, both conceptually of the play action itself. You can see this whale where you can get lost inside its body. In the guts, here you can see Caral, the architect, with a draft model, and Chema Salvan, his colleague photographer, a Barcelona photographer. And the one I like even better, this octopus, where you can play. You have this amazing area where you can slide down and feel like a child again. I have some more ideas, but I'll leave it here so that we have more time afterwards for a Q&A. Okay?
Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's an honor for me to be here. Thank you very much, Sandra, for your invitation and this wonderful opportunity and being in communion to be here with all of you. I speak pretty well English, but I decided to speak in English because today we were talking about language. And I would like to be able to express myself more accurately. Even though today I heard some interesting things, I answer from my body, but I have the desire to say, you know, I will speak, I will not dance.
And I love that we ended with this idea of a playground, because I wanted to share some of the ways in which particular games or the ideas around particular games have been relevant in a particular work of mine, which I wasn't going to talk about, but Edoui today mentioned the idea of the need for certain people to disappear, and within this sort of colonial necessity for the extraction of spaces and people, land, and so on, as we are so vividly seeing today. And so I wanted to speak about my piece, which is actually called The Disappearing Act. I felt that actually maybe that could be an interesting place to share this particular idea, which is hide and seek. Hide and seek, cache-cache, jugar al escondite. And as Lucía talked about earlier, the need to hide to survive. And this is a question that I found interesting looking at my own experience as a person of African descent living in Europe. I'm born in England, but I've lived in Spain for 17 years. And many different moments where you become aware of the ways in which, as a person of African descent, you're often obliged to go into this game that you, unbeknownst to you, are playing, which is kind of looking at the degree of your disappearance to really be able to be present in a space. When I think about my personal life, I also then think about the way in which I have been taught and understood the spaces that I have inhabited. And more specifically, when I moved to Spain, this became very concrete, and in particular, when I moved to Andalusia. And I felt that, again, I was coming up against this idea of visibility and invisibility almost as something that is material. And so I wanted to speak to you about two particular moments when the kind of the personal experience is confronted with a sort of a greater question of space and history. And the first one is El Puente de San Telmo, which I feel like I speak about so often. Anybody who knows Seville, this is a bridge that crosses from the center, so near where the Torre del Oro is, and goes over to Triana, this very famous area where we know was a Gitano community that was moved out in the 50s and 60s out to the sort of outer parts of the city, as often happens with real estate, the need to revalue it and so remove poorer communities from them. And I used to cross this bridge every day to go to a class at a school called Ángel Atienza, so a flamenco class. And I very genuinely would often have this sense of being pulled down into the Guadalquivir. Somehow every time I crossed the river, there was a sense of like something in the waters that had something to do with me. And a few years after, I found out that that was actually the port of the Indies, era el Puerto de las Indias. So this very space was actually a place where lots of ships coming in from the Americas, bringing in the gold, which not only enriched Spain and Portugal, but the rest of Europe, were sort of landing right there where this new bridge, this modern bridge is. So immediately for me, obviously this isn't something that is commemorated. There is nowhere that you can see that this bridge was what it was, or that that space was what it was historically. I've recently found out as well that enslaved Africans would arrive at this very port, and there's a building right opposite it where they'd be washed and prepared to be then crossed over to the other side of the river and sold at the cathedral steps. So this is, I've lived in Seville for 12 years now, and this is history that is not spoken about, and there's no way of sort of, seeing it in the public space. But I feel and I understand that on a sensorial level, somehow my body was paying attention to, or actually sensing that there was somehow some sort of connection, something that remained in that space that I was able to perceive, no? The other example I want to share with you is this incredible piece of footage from 1900, which was filmed by the Lumière brothers in Paris. And I saw this footage in 2013 at a conference in Seville. And I'll just show it to you. Let's just watch it. It's very short. So this is a supposed cuadro flamenco. This is the first ever recorded image of a cuadro flamenco. So, this is a really important historical document here. Even though this is filmed at a World Exposition in Paris, so we have to understand the framing of Spain at that point there's a question around that in and of itself. But I'm going to play it again, and I'm going to just speak over it. So when I first saw this image, and when I saw this man jump out, I believed that I was seeing somebody of African descent on the screen. But the person in the conference kept talking about El Maestro Otero, who was a well-known teacher at the end of the 19th century in the Escuela Bolera style. And I had this kind of visceral feeling because I thought, oh my goodness, at some point everybody's going to mention the fact that this is a black person. And the conference continued, and we were all happy, or everybody else was happy with the fact that it was Maestro Otero. That was 2013. In 2017, Kiko Mora, who's a researcher and a specialist in cinema and flamenco, actually researched this moment properly. And it turns out that the person there was Jacinto Badilla, effectively an African descendant who lived in Spain, who was a flamenco dancer. He did bullfighting, he played guitar, sobrevividor. He was, working it out. But what I found fascinating was that somehow I had seen something that everybody else around me, the optics with which they were looking, the optics of the normality of this as a cuadro flamenco, found it impossible that this person, despite him physically being there as a black person, was completely invisible to them. Let's say it wasn't possible. The impossibility made it optically, not there to a certain extent. So again, for me, it was very interesting to think about the invisible as such. This disconnect between how images are constructed or we think we're seeing versus what can potentially be there. And so I started thinking about the invisible as a material in and of itself, and also the power of hiding. I think it's amazing. Jacinto Badilla, even though he jumps out of his seat, and now we have scholars like Meira Goldberg who are telling us about, if we look carefully, how his dance, you can think of Farruquito and this kind of acrobatic way of dancing flamenco, we can almost trace back to this man, Jacinto Badilla. And so, but there he is hiding in plain sight. I found that kind of an interesting thing to go into. And so this idea of residence time, this idea of the past and the present, residence time is a term that I saw when I was reading this amazing book by Christina Sharp, which is called In the Wake on Blackness and Being, the idea of the colonial past that still isn't resolved, that we're still sort of suspended in. And when I say we, I don't only mean people of African descent, I mean all of us, all of us who are on either side of that equation. And I found this really interesting, the idea of the amount of time it takes for a substance to enter the ocean and then leave the ocean, and then thinking about human blood and thinking about the sodium in our blood, and thinking about the fact that that material takes 260 million years to disappear as such. So in effect, on a certain level, this idea that things are still suspended, still there, despite not being there, despite being invisible, for me kind of suddenly became material. So that is one of the kind of sensations that I actually wanted to explore then in my dance. I wanted to make a piece about this idea of invisibility, this idea, invisibility, not only in the sense of my own presence and those of people of African descent and many other peoples who are minorities in different cultures, but also historically how that is repeated to a certain extent. But I understood also that it was very important to try and find another way of accessing this that didn't reproduce the way I had learned flamenco, which tells us the sort of official narrative and so therefore is exclusive in and of itself. And this is where I started working with Dr. Amare, her practice of embodiology, which I wanted to share with you today and see if we can have a tiny little moment to kind of engage in that, which is this practice that really puts knowledge to the center or centered in the body. And one of the reasons for me that it's important to bring this to the space as well is that often knowledge from the African continent, as well as the people from the African continent, not its resources, and even the resources, the huge resources that continue to support and allow the West to have the wealth it has, is never given the name of where it comes from. It's like there's this reluctance, and I think Glissant spoke about this absolute reluctance to be able to actually give value to the things that come from the African continent. And so as we're all asking these questions about as the world is being destroyed, for many of us, we never were part of that world, so we understand we've been hiding and seeking. And so for me, it's important to kind of try and engage with these other ways of understanding, the other ways of creating knowledge, these other ways of being in ourselves, so as not to myself even reproduce the optics that are unable to value and unable to see everything that I'm talking about. What did this mean? This meant actively going into spaces. Actually, there's something I want to share before that, which is the idea of Sese Selame. And this is, Dr. Ray's practice is really focused on the people of Eastern Ghana, the Ewe people. This is like near the Volta region in the southern eastern part. And they have this understanding that you feel in the body in the same way that we understand sight and hearing and taste and smell. It's almost like, can we believe and can we come to understand as they do that our skin also perceives, that there's a way of knowing that actually also happens in the body. I think that my experience on the bridge was one of those moments of actually perceiving, through this way that was not what I have learned, not to a certain extent, because nobody had ever explained to me what that space was. So very quickly, because I do want to do a little exercise together, I just want to share that I then had to play in spaces. Ultimately, this idea of embodiology is really a praxis of improvisation. It's about deep listening. It's about how we connect, as opposed to disconnect the idea of the body and the surrounding space, which can also be music in and of itself. For the Ano Ewe, there's no separation between dance and music. They both coexist, and flamenco is very similar. You can't do it by yourself. You are in constant kind of listening to the other. So I placed my body in these historical spaces. This is in Ghana. I'm going to zoom through it because it's quite long. But the idea of listening, and so coming into this space where I don't know what it is I'm going to hear. I'm not looking for anything specific. I'm only allowing myself to be in the space to hear what maybe is still suspended. Also as a way of finding the kind of that secret in the hiding, that is that whether you can see me or not, I'm still here. Jacinto Padilla, it's fantastic. You thought I was El Maestro Otero all these years, but here I am, Farruquito, is somehow remembering me. So it's that sense of there's a power in the hiding and questioning the ways in which we, and all peoples, hearing Salman earlier on talk, the way people resist, the way we resist erasure, despite, as Edwy said, the last thing is when we are no longer there. But until we're no longer there are these different ways in which we have always persisted. This is on the actual bridge. This is El Puente de San Telmo. This is a space of escape in the forest. I went to very different spaces. This is in Oporto, where they had the colonial exposition in 1934. This is the island where they had Guinea-Bissau recreated to kind of appease Western notions of an African town in Guinea-Bissau. And then this is the door, coming back to this idea of the door of return, the door of escaping these optics. I'm kind of zooming through, but just to posit these two ideas together of the hiding and seeking, and at the same time there's deep listening. At the same time, what improvisation has and continues to give me, which is a form of play. And in everything I'm sharing here, I feel like I'm communing with what isn't there. But in actual fact, in my live work, I'm always communing with, obviously, the musicians and the audience, in a sense. And I'm really thinking about what Salman was sharing with us, about the need to make communing something that we keep coming back to. It has to become a practice. And there's something in this process of returning to the space, returning to this listening, which really does start to change your daily way of engaging with yourself. And so I'm going to close with a little proposition that I'd like you all to take part in with me. I'd ask for you to put everything you have aside, and I'm going to ask you to stand up, just for us to, and I'm going to come around here, just for us to kind of open up the idea of the power and the potential of being in our bodies and being in our bodies together, and returning to that constantly, because I believe that that is a space that is very powerful, but obviously we don't know what can happen from there. And I think that's also what's interesting. It's attending to the possibility of the act that we must return to. So I'm going to invite Noachi Palmire, who's one of my mentors, into the space. I'll do this for you because you don't have much space, but she always asks that we stand in justice, which means that we find a just separation, not too wide, not too small. I invite you to release your arms. Yes. Just let them be, not in any pockets. And just start paying a tiny bit of attention to your feet as they connect to the ground. And almost travel up and feel your knees and how your hips stand on that support. And we move up and we become observant of our diaphragm, this amazing muscle which allows us to breathe, and breath being something that has been so important in terms of fighting for the life of one to breathe. And so let's pay a little bit of attention to our breath, simply observing our inhalation and our exhalation. And I always like to kind of allow us to include our imagination in this process, so it's almost like when we're breathing in from the ground. And as we breathe out, we return that to the ground and almost feel the weight. And as I say, you might not feel anything, but that's fine. But if you return to this day in and day out and day in and day out, it starts to change the way you perceive yourself in relation to those around you. I'm going to allow us to take it a little bit further. As we breathe in, I'm going to ask you to please bend your knees as you breathe in. So it's like you're really, and as you breathe out, you're going to push against the ground. Yes, don't worry about copying my arms. I'm just doing that so you get this sense of pushing. I'm going to turn to the side so you can see me. It's like a slightly different place we rise to. I like to think of it as the engaged body. So we breathe in and we're bending our knees. And as we breathe out, I don't know if you can see that I'm slightly coming forward into this space, which is a little bit riskier because I could almost come forward and completely fall over, but how do I hold myself to be there? And for me, that's the engaged space. That's the space flamenco is danced in. That's the space where you're open to the listening of others around you. And then I could go on for a long time and do things where we go together, but I just think as an opening to the possibilities of just simply feeling ourselves in the space. So 2 more times and I will leave us. And thank you for being here with us to do this. Breathing in. And we're pushing against the ground and really try to feel eso. And it's so beautiful. We're breathing in one more time. And we're trying to push, 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 push. Eso. Feel the power that is there. Thank you so very much. I'll leave it there. No sé cuánto fue de largo eso. Bueno, tenemos 10 minutos, más o menos.
Qué bien.
I hope it wasn't too long. We had 10 minutes, right? No, that's fine.
Bueno, me voy a tomar la libertad de
Right, I'm gonna dare to comment on something. If someone would like to participate, you're welcome. I remembered when you were talking about spaces and how linking this to these turning points, the importance of space and how you've occupied those spaces, and the way words and space is, the two of them are so important. Thinking in some abstract terms, at least in the Spanish language, some abstract terms are based on knowledge and spatial and body relationships, because there is a metaphor. We need the metaphor of our body and space to be able to express whatever we cannot touch, whatever is abstract. We say the path of life, for example, this spatial path, or carry on your back the weight of responsibility. We need to anchor ourselves with this. I've loved what you explained, and I just wanted to add this note on language as a linguist myself. I don't know whether anyone wanted to ask. I was menaced to be posed very tricky questions, but I think they are shying out.
Nadie se anima. Yo, ¿sí?
No one? Yes.
Ha cumplido la vale.
Okay.
Una pregunta.
I have a question for our bailaora, the African descendant and British colleague. What took you to flamenco? I mean, you first visited Seville and you related its history with the slavery waves coming to. It was totally the other way around. It was the body. It was learning my flamenco lessons. My first classes happened in the UK, and then my desire to know more attracted me to Spain, Madrid, and then Andalusia. And even though it's been a big battle, this bodily need that I would have never, ever imagined that I would find what is in Andalusia, this legacy, this if someone had ever told me that this pulse, this palpitation was there, I would have never imagined during my first lessons. I didn't understand at the beginning of that really urging desire. I would have never believed it. But I believe that even though I've shared my journey, I believe that the possibility of learning to listen to our bodies, we are losing it, as Moritz shared with us. This life, now that it's developed from the visual universe, as Moritz mentioned, the way images lie, they are almost always lying. And in my opinion, this body that sometimes I dance because I need to understand, not to be a choreographer. I understand choreography differently now. It is born from, how to say, that sensitivity that I believe is everywhere. I don't want to share because it's my journey, but rather how we could all be back again into our bodies, because this is very interesting knowledge. I didn't have the time, but I wanted to, this Sese Selame idea takes us to the kinesthetic napping, perceiving the other from my body. I'm not, it's not an idealistic optics from a different culture, but if we have hierarchies and a code who is above other people, it's really hard to see far beyond that if this is not somehow corrected. So this mapping of being able to learn from, if I can move with that other person,
una observación que parte de yo literalmente querer meterme en el cuerpo de la otra persona.
It's the idea of, again, I believe it's very interesting. We should pay attention. It's not something we need to do just once. It's going to be part of our value system. Maybe this way we may be able to reach other conclusions as to how to tackle our problems. And also I would add, in this idea of hide and seek that we have seen in the cloud, as Salman was talking about their project, there lies the potential of, even though they are stealing our data because of our actions with our fingertips, our bodily activity is the single space. And I understand that enslaved people, it was there, even though my body doesn't belong to me because I am like a donkey for you, at the end of the day, I am an agent. I still hold agency on my own body. Even though I'm working 24/7, I still manage to find the way of dancing, loving, living, working on my own body. And this is how it's so interesting. How could I say? This bodily conscience, it's much more difficult to say, no, you are not this or that. Do you understand me?
Hola, muchísimas gracias.
Hello, thank you very much. My question is for Lucía. I would love you to please explain, maybe I didn't understand it correctly, when you mentioned that learning to speak is learning to play. The way I see things, we play a lot before we learn how to speak. Play arrives much sooner. So could you please clarify that idea for us? Sure. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to develop this idea. When I remembered the alphabet, basically, this construction of the letters and how to start building our first words, like C being half of a donut. Precisely, babies and how we need these playful mechanisms to be able to learn. Both things really happen at the same time. Surely we play before we can speak, but it is linked since the very beginning, the two of them. But afterwards, we develop our alphabetization capacity of reading and writing. We can gesticulate, we can speak, but writing is a learning process. And we need fiction mechanisms to learn it, like the half donut. And these mechanisms take to lies, this construction, this playing with fiction and lies to be able to learn how to read or write. This is what I meant.
A mí también me gustaría decir alguna cosa.
I would also like to add something. I see reality as a big Babel tower where sometimes we don't understand each other. First of all, thank you so much, Mr. Moratinos and Sandra, for creating such dialogue spaces for all of us. I work or am part of the Minorca for Peace platform. Please allow me to mention that every Saturday we organize 10 minutes of silence. And amongst everything you've said this minute, that you helped us, all of us together. You know, I am thinking of, yes, you know, I am there. This collective thinking, Yinka, as you invited us to abandon the word for a minute. And we need to reach agreements by feeling our bodies. This is what I wanted to express. Thanks. Hello. I would like to ask a question to Moritz. I think this is a recurrent question in the artistic world, above all in the photography world on AI. It seems that we see constructions of images and we depart from something non-verbalized, but we have the image present. But the AI creation is activated by the use of words. What do you think about this horizon in front of us with AI? Is this fear justified? With Photoshop, every time there's a change in dimension, there's a crisis or some moments of panic. You being in touch with this world, what is your opinion with regards on AI? Not only by means of words. Usually, we start with a prompt, these sentences, these words that we ask AI. These instructions for the machine. Create a ballerina with a flamenco dress and another one dancing nearby. And then the algorithm, the machine, searches for these images. But we can also do the same from the image itself with the new AI generation, you can also combine two images, one with a flamenco dancer and an African Yoruba dancer sitting on a chair, and say, could you please combine the two? And it also works. This is just as a footnote. This is going to become more and more important, creating images and even videos from other existing videos or images. But as for fear of image producers, that is, may steal their jobs, obviously this fear is linked, is reflected also with the fear of accountants, because they believe machines will do accountancy and many other jobs that will be lost. Surely some will be lost. For example, the product photographer, the stock photography, we say, for catalogs. During COVID, we needed a lot. A photograph of a nurse injecting the vaccine, whatever. This is easy to substitute by AI or AI-generated images. But human creativity and what we always say, looking far ahead, creating something that does not exist, this cannot be substituted, because these algorithms always create from whatever is existing in the huge database that is the internet, but not thinking of non-existent things or concepts. So playing is our secret weapon in this battle. Yeah, bravo.
Pues sí, muchísimas gracias a los
Right,
tres.
thank you very much. Thank you to have helped us try to understand what lie hidden behind words and images and movements. Yinka, as you've helped us understand that we need to be listening, because it's the only way to understand and comprehend each other. Thank you. Thank you all.